I think, Riz, it's not just the Arab street, though it is primarily that, the much mocked, much maligned, much derided Arab street, and people said the Arabs are dead, they're incapable of doing anything. Well, they've risen again, as they rose once before in the 60s and 70s, but they've risen this time in a totally different world, in a totally different context. The first wave of Arab nationalism, Nasser in Egypt, Qasem in Baghdad, radicals in Damascus, revolutions in the Yemen, etc., etc., took place when we were living in a multipolar world. And so they could be more daring, more innovative, more bold in what they demanded. The democratic revolutions that we're witnessing today in the Arab world are taking place at a time when the United States is the dominant power, not just in the region, but in the world, certainly militarily and politically, if not economically. The Europeans completely follow American dictates all along the line. So in this situation, the insurgent masses cannot achieve what their forebears did. They have to operate in different circumstances, but so far they're doing it very well, and the demands they are making are impeccable. Democratic demands for democratic elections, democratic constitutions. And the West, in which democracy itself is hollowing out, because you have political parties running governments without any differences, no basic differences with each other, both in Europe and in North America, should actually be encouraged by this outburst, flowering of democracy in the Arab world. It's extremely positive and has a lot to teach the West.
That was Tariq Ali speaking with me earlier. Now over to my guest, Dr. Zalmay Khalilzad, who served as the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Afghanistan and the United Nations under the George Bush administration. He now also sits on the board of the Washington-based National Endowment for Democracy. Ambassador, it's good to have you on. The phone lines are now open. You can actually call in and speak with Ambassador Khalilzad as well if you want to. So I want to get some of your responses to what Tariq Ali was saying. He holds back no punches. But I have to ask you, were you surprised with the domino effect that's taken place and the speed with which it happened?
Oh, absolutely. Although one is not surprised that the instability in the Arab world was going to lead to a reaction on the part of the people, because governments were repressive. The people were unhappy because of the economic circumstances, because of lack of political freedom, and they were being more educated and netted with each other and with the world, aware of what's going on around the world. So there was this revolutionary gap, state going one way, society in another, that something was going to happen. But the timing and the way it has happened and the way that it has spread has caught everyone by surprise.
But hasn't it, Ambassador, in one real instance shown how the Arab world can create change by itself, and certainly much more cheaply, effectively, and without the US coming in guns blazing?
Well, absolutely, of course, and this is very inspiring and very positive, because some of us who argued for democratization of the broader Middle East after 9/11, arguing that one of the reasons for why extremism and terror was being produced in some parts of the region was because of the dysfunctionality of the region, and one thing that was needed that would be helpful would be the democratization of the region. And there were people who were arguing, no, the Arabs do not want democracy, it's alien to them, they are not ready. And we would argue, people used to say that about Indians, they used to say that about the Japanese, about the Germans, that the Arabs were equally capable of ultimately producing democratic systems. And unfortunately, because the democratization issue got entangled with the unpopular war in Iraq, it developed a negative aura about it. But now I think everyone has to agree that the people of this region are like people everywhere.
Well, let me get a couple of calls in. First one, Mark in Canada. What would you like to add?
Okay. First, I'd like to say, AlJazeera, I'm glad you're broadcasting in Canada, because actually the response has been great, and just bravo. And I would like to ask your guest, just an observation, my personal, is that everybody's complaining about the slow response in Canada, which has been embarrassing, and the U.S. wouldn't it be true is that a lot of these nations, such as Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Saudi Arabia, a great population are young now, and they've come of age, and they're saying, you know what, we're not going to be told by the West, we're not going to be told by Britain or anything. This is we are now going to guide our destiny, and we're not that much for sale.
Mark, let me put that to the ambassador this way: is considering what's happened and the speed with which it's happened, are those various populations in each of these countries really set up to create some kind of viable, sustainable transition?
Well, that's a different issue. I mean, there is great potential, obviously, here. It's inspiring. But what will ultimately happen? Can an orderly transition to a democratic order take place? God forbid, or can it lead to chaos? Can it lead to kind of people who have ideas of a new kind of tyranny hijack the agenda or the movement? And I think this is where the world also needs to focus on, how to assist, recognizing that the leverage that the West, the United States, has is limited, that this is really not under anyone's control, but whatever influence one has is to encourage a process that produces successful democratic entities and governments in the region.
A delicate balancing act, though, isn't it? Not to go in and interfere, but to actually encourage them.
Exactly, because there are places where the influence is greater. For example, the influence over Egyptian military that I think the United States exercised was very positive to urge restraint. Now we see with Libya, the U.S. did not have much of an influence relation with the military, and there is a great danger of fragmentation, of a continuing civil war, of potential division of the country. That is where the world can, I think, play a more helpful role to facilitate a transition that will be more orderly and lead to a democratic order.
Well, let's get another call here. Jerry in Washington, D.C., thanks for your patience. What would you like to ask?
Yes, I'd like to say that I think the Arabs have a lot to be proud of these days in the Middle East, especially with their nonviolence, and that I think the U.S. policy is trying to catch up a pace with what's going on, and they do have a hypocritical policy with Israel. It makes for schizophrenia because the U.S. does want to support democratic forces, and I do think that the many things that Secretary Clinton has been saying for pro-democratic forces in the Middle East and support of the rebels is really wonderful, and I think that the only other thing is that the U.S. I think it was very good that Senators McCain and Lieberman were in Tahrir Square yesterday. I think that's a very good sign.
Okay, Jerry, let me ask the ambassador then. This, you know, obviously there's a delicate role here that America's playing, but this issue that Jerry raised about the Palestinian-Israeli dynamic, the whole thing at the beginning of the show, I was talking about how Barack Obama came in saying there will be no settlements, and of course then the veto was used, sending a totally opposite message, a complete flip-flop, and it must come across as very hypocritical.
Well, I think that on the Israel issue, of course, there is a broad